Hello, from Birmingham City. Welcome to another edition of On the Whistle. Loads of questions this week. Thanks so much for sending them in. I wish there could be cheerier questions and I could give you cheerier answers, but unfortunately it was another really disappointing afternoon for Sunderland. And actually I thought that game probably was the Michael Beale era in a microcosm so far. The first half, alright, Sunderland didn't have loads of chances. They didn't completely dominate the game, but the work rate was terrific. They really limited Birmingham in front of a sellout crowd. And I did think they deserved the lead. I thought there was a lot of promising things in that game. The pressing was good, and they looked a threat on the break. And the second half, they just couldn't cope with Birmingham. I think that Birmingham found the spaces in Sunderland's setup. It's something we talk about a lot. They're out of possession. Sunderland go very, very narrow, and I think that has its benefits. And you saw that in the first half. Birmingham played into it a lot, but I thought the second half they found that space out wide over and over again. Miyoshi drifted in field. What a clever player he is, such a Tony Mowbray footballer, I thought. So I thought it was a really disappointing second half. And again, Sunderland was so slow to respond to the issues that they were facing. And I think it's hard to say that Birmingham didn't deserve it in the end, albeit neither side really had loads of chances. So listen, I'm going to get straight into your questions because we've had so many. I'll probably put a few in together as one because, as you can imagine, there's a fairly consistent theme to the questions. The first one I'm going to answer is from Liam. Thanks for sending this in, Liam, who says, I'd like to hear about the Echo's stance on Treygate. So I'm sure if you're watching this, you've seen it now. A slightly strange scenario at the end where Trey Hume was substituted. Actually, just before Sunderland were going to defend a corner, Louis Hamir came on. Hume then came round the side of the pitch because of the new rules and went to shake Michael Beale's hand, and Michael Beale didn't shake his hand. Very strange. Beale was asked about it after. I hadn't seen it before the press conference, but my colleague Nick Barnes asked from BBC Radio Newcastle, asked Beale about it. He insisted that he hadn't seen Hume. He said he had a really good relationship with Hume and that he would go straight away and apologise to him. He seemed really surprised, I think. Obviously people will have their own opinions on what happened. But yeah, that's the only answer I can give you. That's what's being said. Not ideal, I think. It's another storm, really, that Sunderland don't need. And for the record, I thought Hume, again, was one of Sunderland's best players today. Hugely committed performance. Even in a poor run of form, he's one who continues to hold his head high. John Ridley asks, why can we not get a complete 90-minute performance? This is a really, really good question. I have no idea. Sorry, John. No, listen, I asked Beale exactly about this after the Huddersfield game, and his response was a slightly odd one in that he said, well, it's because the gap between the two teams on Wednesday night and generally across the division outside the top four isn't that large. And I suppose you could argue that Birmingham have got some really good individuals. Like, I think that's fair to say that they're better than where they were under Wayne Rooney, for example. Like I say, wow, Miyoshi, what a wonderful footballer. I think he would walk into any team. Stansfield is an outstanding young prospect up front. The way he took control of the game in the second half, ran the channels, ran into space. I thought he was absolutely excellent. In terms of why do I think Sunderland can't get a complete 90-minute performance, I think at the moment they look like a little bit of a confused team to me. I think they're in obviously a bit of a transition away from Mowbray. I thought the second half from Birmingham was pretty classic Mogger ball, to be honest. And I think Sunderland are a little bit confused. And I think one thing I would say as well is they seem very slow to react when things are going wrong. And I thought the second half was an example of that. It took a long time for them to make changes, even though the direction of the game I thought was pretty clear. And you have to say that the substitutions who came on didn't impact it. I think there's some inconsistency in selection, which I think is understandable, obviously, because some players are struggling to find consistency at this level. I do think that having such a young side, I think, is a factor. It's not a take away from the setup or even to give the players an excuse, because I don't think some of the performances recently have been good enough. But I do think that sometimes, there seems to be a huge fluctuation in their intensity, and sometimes I feel like when there's a big occasion or a big game or they're playing a high-class opponent, like the first half here, it was a really intense atmosphere. It feels like it really gets them going, and sometimes it feels like they struggle to hit that level when the atmosphere is not intense or when there isn't as much focus around the game. That might be wrong, but I'm just thinking back to Huddersfield on Wednesday night. I'm thinking back to the Rotherham game away, Huddersfield at home earlier in the season. I do wonder if that's a bit of a theme. I don't really have the answer to that question, John, but thanks very much for sending it in, because I think it's the big question around this team at the moment. What else have we got? Michael Bauer says, I know we have issues going forward, but that doesn't excuse the goals against being poor recently. What do we do to stop the amount of poor goals we're giving away? Well, it's another incident where Sunderland have switched off from a set piece. It's just inexcusable, that aspect of it, really, isn't it? It's just not good enough. It's a quick free kick, Sunderland are asleep. They don't spot Stansfield's run. and then they're the slowest to respond to the deflection as well. I'm not really sure how you go about correcting that, other than it just has to improve. The first goal, personally, I think maybe Patterson could do better. Does he palm it back out into a dangerous area? He made a brilliant save from Jay Stansfield in the first half. That was arrowing into the top corner, so I don't want to be too critical. But I do think, listen, I feel that first goal personally was inevitable, Michael, in terms of, yes, it's sloppy defending, yes, there's things you can do better, but I think when Birmingham took control of the midfield battle and they kept getting overloads in the wide areas, I think it's a matter of time before the goals come. So in my personal opinion, the first goal comes because the balance of the game has switched, and because Birmingham were winning the tactical battle at that stage, and they were dominating possession and finding spaces. So I think there was a sense of inevitability. That's just, my opinion. In terms of the set pieces, I don't really know what to say other than the conversations got to be an awful lot better. Pretty much every other question I've got is about Michael Beale and Michael Beale's future. So I'm just going to address that one as the last one, as my kind of final point. I do think that Michael Beale, if results don't improve very quickly, is going to come under pressure, because I think if you look at the table, I think the season is hanging by a thread. Sunderland have to get 3 points against Swansea next weekend. I really do believe that, because the gap now to the playoffs is widening. Coventry are coming into really strong form. West Brom lost Friday night at Southampton, but we know how good a side they are. Their season, I think, is only going to go in one direction. And obviously Hull have been more consistent really over recent times, even when I don't think their performances have been brilliant. You look after the Swansea game, Sunderland, I believe, have Norwich away, Leicester at home, Southampton away. They're getting themselves into a position where they're going to have to get probably 6 points minimum from those games to really still be in contention going into that international break. If they're not in contention at that international break, I think it's going to be a really difficult conversation for Sunderland, because obviously at that point the season's at risk of being cut adrift. And having sacked Tony Mowbray, even though some people felt, and everyone will have their own opinions, that there were sort of some valid reasons for that, or could understand it, it's not a change I would have made, but I respect other people's opinions. I think to be in that position would raise some serious questions. I think Sunderland will want to stick by Beale, whether we agree with that or not. They believe that he's an excellent coach, and that in time the fruits of his work on the training ground are going to be seen. I think it's fair to say that at this stage the jury's out, isn't it? Because we're just not seeing tangible improvements over and over again. There are aspects in games where you see it, where the play's a little bit more direct, and I think there's a little bit more space for the wingers, and you kind of get the idea. There are times in games where they limit the opposition, and you can see that defensively there's an idea there to be narrower, to be tighter, to give up fewer chances, and you can sort of understand where he's trying to take the team. But from game to game, it just the lack of consistency and the lack of coherence. At least you would have to say that earlier in the season, even though someone could frustrate the life out of you with their lack of clinical edge in the final third, there was a real blueprint, and you had a real feeling about where the team was going to go. And I'm not entirely sure that's the case. And as long as that continues, if you're not churning out the results, there is going to be a huge amount of discussion. So, yeah, I do believe that Michael Beale needs a run of form very, very, very quickly. But over and above that, he also needs to demonstrate that there's a clear idea of where he wants to take this team. Because at the moment, although there's flashes within games, they aren't as fun to watch as they were either earlier in the season, even though they were frustrating us, weren't they, in a lot of games. And they're certainly not exciting as they were last season. And at the moment, they're not progressing as a team. They're not progressing in terms of points per game. I would argue that statistically the data shows that they're not progressing as a team, and that's a major concern. I'm going to leave you with one I want to end it on one little positive comment. I thought the first half from Romain Mundle looked really, really exciting, and he caused Birmingham a lot of problems, and he's going to have to going forward, because I've just had it confirmed from Beale in the post-match press conference that Roberts is out for 4 to 5 weeks. When I was just talking about those games coming up, that's a huge loss. I think we've seen in his absence just how important he is. So, yeah, sorry we couldn't do a cheerier edition of On the Whistle. Thanks so much again for sending your questions in. I know some of you, I won't have answered your questions, but hopefully I think I've covered up all the topics that everyone asked about. And you never know, I might be able to get to one in the week. So, yeah, thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe. Please come and see us on the Echo website, read our stuff, come find me on Twitter. Yeah, let's see what the next week brings. It's never dull, is it?